So, August 15th, 1947, India finally gets its independence. But what did its economy actually look like at that moment? That's what we're going to unpack in this explainer. The state of the Indian economy right on the eve of independence. Okay, to really get a grip on what India was starting with in 1947, we have to rewind the clock a lot. Take a look at this quote from a French traveler back in the 17th century. He says Bengal was richer than Egypt. This tells you that pre-colonial India, well, it wasn't just getting by. It was a seriously prosperous global trading powerhouse. Which, of course, brings up the big question, right? If India was so prosperous, what on earth happened? What changed between then and 1947? And the answer, as we're about to see, is pretty clear. Nearly 2 centuries of British rule. All right, so let's set the scene. What was India like before the British really took hold? Well, it was mostly an independent farming-based economy. But, and this is a huge but, it was so much more than just a nation of farmers. It was a manufacturing powerhouse, famous around the world. I mean, India was the place for amazing handicraft industries. We're talking about incredibly fine cottons and silks, beautiful metalwork, you name it. The craftsmanship was just on another level. Think about Dakai muslin. The best version of it, called malmal, was literally considered fit for royalty all across the globe. Then the British arrive, and everything starts to change. It was a massive shift. You see, their policies weren't about helping India continue to prosper. Nope, the goal was to completely rewire India's economy to serve their own interests. And this right here, this is the core strategy, laid out plain and simple. The whole point of their economic policy was to do 2 things. 1, turn India into a massive supplier of raw materials for Britain's booming industries. And 2, turn India into a captive market to buy all the finished goods made in those British factories. It was a perfect closed loop, all designed to benefit Great Britain. And listen to this quote from a British viceroy. It's so telling. He calls India the pivot of our empire. Not just a colony, but the very center of it all. It was the economic engine that made the whole thing run. For them, losing India wasn't just losing territory. It meant, as he put it, the sun of our empire will have set. That's how crucial it was. And they were smart about it. Strategic projects like the opening of the Suez Canal were absolute game changers. Suddenly, you have this direct highway by sea. It slashed transportation costs and time, which meant Britain could tighten its grip on India's trade even more. It made pulling resources out of India faster and cheaper than ever. Okay, so that's the blueprint, the grand plan. But how did it actually play out on the ground? Let's take a look at what this meant for the key parts of India's economy. First up, agriculture. You have to remember, this was the backbone of the entire economy. Something like 85% of the population lived in villages and made their living from the land. So of course, this was one of the first things the British set out to completely reshape. But here's the thing, even though it was so important, the agricultural sector pretty much ground to a halt. You had these land settlement systems, like the zamindari system, that basically funneled all the profits to landlords instead of the farmers doing the work. There was almost no investment in new technology, irrigation, nothing. And on top of that, farmers were pushed to stop growing food for themselves and start growing cash crops, like indigo and cotton, that British industries needed. And for the farmers, this shift did next to nothing to improve their lives. Now let's talk about industry. What happened here is often called deindustrialization, and it was a very deliberate, 2-pronged attack. First, they systematically crushed India's famous handicraft industries. This left tons of skilled artisans out of work. And then, step 2, they filled that new gap in the market with cheap factory-made goods imported from Britain. Brilliant for them, devastating for India. So you might be thinking, okay, but did they at least build up a modern industrial base to replace what was lost? The short answer is not really. I mean, look at the timeline. Progress was just incredibly slow. Yeah, some cotton and jute mills popped up in the mid-1800s, and Tisco, the Tata Iron and Steel Company, was a huge deal in 1907. But there was a massive piece of the puzzle missing, a capital goods industry. You know, the industries that build the machines and tools for other industries. Without that, you can't have real self-sufficient industrial growth. It's just not possible. And this table just shows you how completely India's trade got flipped on its head. The country went from exporting valuable finished products to the world to just exporting raw materials from the ground. And in return, it had to import all the finished clothes and machinery it needed, mostly from Britain, a total reversal. Now, looking at the numbers, you might say, hey, but India was still exporting a lot. And you'd be right, there was a big export surplus. But, and here's the kicker, that money, that wealth, never came back to India. Instead, it was siphoned off to pay for all the British administrative offices, to fund Britain's wars, you name it. It's what historians call the massive drain of Indian wealth. So we've talked about the economy, the sectors, the trade, but what did all this actually mean for the people living there? What was the human cost? Well, the numbers from that time, they paint a pretty grim picture. Let's start with literacy. The overall rate was less than 16%. Just think about that for a second. That means more than 4 out of every 5 people in the entire country couldn't read or write. And for women, it was even worse. Female literacy was hovering at a shocking 7%. 7. The opportunities for half the population were just practically zero. When it came to public health, facilities were either just not there or they were completely inadequate. So, of course, diseases spread like wildfire. And the consequences, they were devastating. The infant mortality rate was a staggering 218 for every 1,000 births. It's a number that's just hard to even wrap your head around. So you put it all together, the poor health, the poverty, the constant threat of disease, and what do you get? An average life expectancy of just 32 years. 32! If there's one single number that captures the state of the country at independence, that might be it. So let's pull all this together. When the clock struck midnight on August 15, 1947, what kind of economy was independent India actually inheriting? Well, it was a legacy of enormous, deep-seated challenges. Now, you could argue that the British left behind some useful infrastructure, right, like the railways, and that's true. But you always have to ask, who was it built for? The motive was never to help the Indian people. The railways weren't built to connect villages. They were built to move the army around quickly. They weren't built to help India become self-sufficient. They were built to haul raw materials out of the country and down to the ports. And the result of all this was an economy that was completely lopsided. About 75% of the entire workforce was stuck in agriculture. Manufacturing, just 10%. It was a total reversal from that diverse, vibrant pre-colonial economy we started with. So that's the inheritance. A stagnant agricultural sector, a crippled industrial base, and an economic system designed from top to bottom to benefit a foreign power. Which leaves us with the absolutely massive question that faced India's first leaders back in 1947. After 200 years of being rewired to serve someone else, how do you even start to build an economy for yourself?